Would you like to maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how you and software craftsmanship met?
Oh, well, that's an interesting story. And it goes very far back in time. It goes back to extreme programming and Agile and all of that, which we did back in 1999 and 2000, 2001. We had the Agile Manifesto. We had the meeting at Snowbird. We started the whole Agile movement. And then the year, I think, was probably 2007, 2008. And it became kind of clear that the Agile community had left us behind somehow. Specifically programmers, specifically technical people. The Agile community had reorganized itself around management principles and had left the programmers to their own devices, which was in some sense ironic. Excuse me. Which was in some sense ironic because the Agile movement was started by programmers. And then several years later we find that it's been overrun by management people and the programmers are left in a kind of dungeon. And so several of us wanted to reassert the significance of the technical side and the programming side of Agile, and the notion of software craftsmanship was born out of that. The goal was to bring the craftsmanship values back into Agile. My particular goal was to try and drive the Agile community to open its doors again and integrate back in with the technical people. There was a statement made long ago by Kent Beck, which was Agile was about the healing of the distrust between business and technical people. And I had a real, powerful hope that was going to happen with Agile. And then there was this change in Agile, and suddenly Agile became the division between business and technical people, which I find kind of startling and ironic. And the goal of craftsmanship was to undo that. I don't know how well we've succeeded at that. I think we're still working on it.
Well, that leads to my next question. On the 10th anniversary now of software craftsmanship.
Yeah, it's 10 years it's been. Yeah.
And what do you think the impact software craftsmanship has had?
In some sense, the last 10 years have been a kind of sequestering. Software craftsmanship has been a place for some programmers to talk about significant things that matter to programmers. But it has not been an influential grand movement the way Agile has been, nor has it had any real impact on Agile, which was the original intent. So I'm kind of puzzled by that. I'm also hopeful that as the craftsmanship movement gathers steam, as more and more people get involved in it, it will have the desired effect on the Agile community. I hope it does.
Do you sense it's gathering steam? Are you optimistic that the movement can get bigger?
Certainly this conference filled me with quite a bit of hope. I'm very pleased with the turnout here and the amount of energy here. And I do see, from place to place, there's a lot of folks interested in the basic idea that programmers should be proud of the way they work. So I hope, it's probably the best way for me to put it, I hope that the craftsmanship movement continues to grow and can put the influence on the Agile community that it needs to.
I remember seeing you give talks early on in the days of software craftsmanship on subjects like the re-emergence or potential re-emergence of functional programming.
Yes.
And another one on the importance of keeping your domain logic pure with simple interfaces.
Yes.
How do you see those speeches? Do you think those original observations have held up well?
So the functional programming one is very interesting. It has not held up well. The original idea there was that Moore's law had ended and clock rates weren't increasing, and what we were seeing instead was the proliferation of cores. And so there was this concern that we would have to be dealing with machines that had 1,024 cores. And how do you do that? How do you do that in Java? How do you do that in C#? And one of the answers was, well, you can't do it in those languages very well, but you can do extreme concurrency in functional languages because they're immutable, and you can't have race conditions. So that, I think, was the thing that started the impetus for functional programming. What we've seen, though, over the last several years is that the number of cores has not proliferated. Right? Clock rates have stalled. The number of cores have not proliferated. We seem to be on this plateau of technology where the computers are not actually getting better and haven't gotten better in any sense for the last 10 years. And so I think the pressure for functional programming has relaxed. The interest has not, because there's now a whole bunch of people who got interested in it early on and are now thinking, well, it's actually kind of an expressive way of working and interesting. So I look at functional programming now without the urgency that I had before with Moore's Law ending. And I look at it now more like the way objects were in 1998. An interesting technology, one that was probably going to have a profound effect on the industry, but not the desperate urgency that we felt, say, 5 years ago for functional programming.
Okay. Are there any concepts or factors in software development that maybe 10 years ago may not have been considered significant, but you think now seem to be gaining in importance? Are there things that you think that we need to be focusing on?
So now, in 2018, software dominates the whole world, especially in Western society. But there is literally nothing you can do in our society without interacting with the software system. This was not true even 10 years ago. But it has become more and more true over the last few years that programmers are at the very base of almost everything that happens in Western society and in much of the world as well. And I don't think the normal people in the world, I don't think normal citizens understand that. I don't think they understand that there's this subculture of people, programmers, that they depend upon for their fortunes, for their lives, for their daily interactions. I don't think programmers quite understand that either. But society is now resting on programmers' shoulders. And the programmers themselves are not behaving as though they carried that level of responsibility. They're still behaving like they did in the 1980s. Rather informal, low discipline kind of folks. And I don't think that's sustainable. I believe what's going to happen is that society is at some point going to look around and realize that the foundation they're built on is on these programmers, and these programmers are going to have to be a lot more professional than they currently are. So I'm worried that something like that is in the offing very soon. We saw a hint of it with the Volkswagen fiasco in California, where there were some programmers who wrote some code that lied and cheated the environmental testing. And that was quite a ruckus. We also saw hints of it with the Toyota payout of cars that were crashing and killing their passengers because of software failures. There was Knight Capital about 5 years ago lost almost $500 million in 45 minutes because of a simple software failure. These kinds of things cannot continue without being noticed. I thought maybe the fiasco over Obamacare might have triggered it, but it didn't. So at some point, some disaster is going to trigger the politicians of the world and the citizens of the world to look around and say, well, wait a minute, what are these guys doing? How can they be safe? How can we be safe? What can we do to make them safe? So I fear that we are going to be a regulated industry unless we learn to very rapidly now to regulate ourselves.
Yeah, we're more or less waiting for some sort of black swan event, really, that is going to change the mindset. And do you think we need to be sort of concentrating more on the concept of resilience and software and just making better quality?
Yes, of course. I think we should be focusing on the idea of programmer discipline, resilient software. We should be changing the way we think about code. Code is not this informal thing that we kind of throw together to make a machine work a little bit for our entertainment or our profit. It's a substantial element of our civilization. And if we don't treat it that way, then we're going to build this superstructure that's going to crumble on us.
A common theme of your talks about professionalism and professionalism in the industry. I mean, what does software craftsman, do you think software craftsmanship has aided professionalism in the industry, and what does it mean to you?
Well, yes, I think that the software craftsmanship movement is the torch carrier for professionalism in the software industry. I mean, I've been closely associated with software craftsmanship and professionalism and never really thought there was a difference between the two. It is those people in the software craftsmanship community that are making this statement that they are dedicated to the idea of being professionals, of behaving in a disciplined manner, of having a set of ethics and standards. That's what marks a professional in any industry, and that's what it's going to take for software developers as well. So yes, software craftsmanship is essential to the notion of professionalism.
Okay, and lastly, what do you hope that people will take away from your talk?
The talk today, the thing I hope that people take away from the talk today is that there is an ethical element to being a software developer. There is a responsibility that all software developers have to their companies and to society as a whole. And it is worth treating yourself as a programmer the way a doctor treats themselves as a doctor, with a certain promise to behave in a certain way. Doctors take an oath to use their talents for the betterment of mankind, first to do no harm. And it seems to me appropriate for software developers, given that the responsibility is so great and the dependence of our society is so large, it is appropriate for software developers to take a similar kind of oath, make a promise to themselves to behave responsibly in this industry that we are all coming to depend upon so much.